Okay, we're going to start back up in about a minute. You can make your way to your seats. Okay, welcome back from the break. I was just kind of joking, and we saved the easy stuff for the end of the day. So the next item on our agenda will likely be a very good discussion regarding summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass. And we're going to be talking about finalizing the commercial and recreational allocation amendment. I just want to give everybody notice that due to flights and other travel arrangements, we do have a hard stop this evening at 7 o'clock. That's the latest that we can go, so people aren't going to miss flights and things. So we've got a couple hours to debate this, but just keep that in mind as we consider the alternatives and talk about motions that we do need to wrap this up before 7 o'clock, if at all possible. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn the mic over to Kylie, Dancy, and Savannah Lewis for the presentation, and then we'll get things started whenever you guys are ready.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to start things off today. My name is Savannah Lewis from the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Council, and I just want to say it's great to be here with everybody in person today. So I'm just going to be starting off the presentation today with a brief overview of the allocation amendment, just to refresh everybody's memories on content, mention the additional alternatives that have been added, and then Kylie's going to do the second half of the presentation and review recommendations of the FMAT Council and a brief recap of public comments. Next slide. So back in April, both the council and the board approved this motion to postpone the final decision on the amendment to this meeting in order to give the Recreational Reform Initiative a chance to develop a bit more. Next slide. In April, it was also agreed that the council and board would consider new alternatives to the amendment.
Want to come talk with us. So it's pretty tough to claim privilege and then list it in a book that you're trying to sell.
So in April, it was also agreed that the council and board would consider new alternatives to the amendment as long as they were within the existing range. So in August, 4 new alternatives for each species were proposed from a group of board and council members. Next slide. The additional alternatives proposed include both catch and landings-based options based on 2 different baselines, as you can see up on the slide. 2004 through 2018 base years with RHL overage years excluded, and a 50-50 weighting of historical base years and the base years with the RHL overages excluded. All were within the range of previous alternatives and were incorporated into the revised decision document that was included in your briefing materials. Today, the board and council are here to consider final action on this amendment. So here's a quick summary of the issues as well as the corresponding option numbering for your reference as we go through the presentation. The decision document was also included in briefing materials. So on the next few slides, I'm going to very briefly go through the options under consideration for this amendment, but it's important to note that the allocation percentages are not directly comparable between catch-based and landings-based allocation approaches due to allocations being applied to landings in one method and catch in another. They will result in different impacts on the sector ACLs and sector landings limits based on the step in the process where the allocation is applied. Both methods will require sector-specific ACLs, quotas, and RHLs. So first, here are the summer flounder allocation options, or option set 1A. The percentages are on the left and the basis for the percentages are on the right. The catch-based alternatives are on the top. However, they are not directly comparable to the landings-based percentages presented on the bottom. The alternatives range from the current landings-based allocation of 60% to the commercial fishery and 40% to the recreational fishery, which is the status quo option highlighted in blue, to the catch-based allocations of 40% of the catch to the commercial fishery and 60% for the recreational fishery. More information on the basis for these alternatives is in Appendix B of the document. Here's the Scup allocations or option set 1B. Similar to summer flounder, you have status quo highlighted in blue, with the percentages on the left and the basis on the right. More information for the basis for these alternatives is also in Appendix B document. And finally, here are the black sea bass. Oh, sorry, thank you. So finally, here are the black sea bass allocation options or option set 1C, highlighted in blue. You can see the no action status quo option. And again, the percentages are presented on the left with the basis on the right. And you can reference additional information about these or about these options within your decision document. So it is important to note that for all of the allocations presented here today, we cannot predict future quotas and RHLs under current or revised allocations, as these depend on future projections of biomass and sector-specific dead discards. The decision document analysis does include example limits based on a regression analysis to attempt to predict and has been updated to include the 2023 ABCs, but the future limits will vary from these numbers. So these next few slides are graphs that are all included in your public hearing document. Here is presented the summer flounder figure with the example quotas and RHLs. Again, these have been updated to use 2023 ABC from Table 5. For both commercial and recreational landings, you'll see on the left you have the commercial fishery, on the right you have the recreational fishery comparisons. 2020 data are not included in this figure or other figures for the other two species, as they may not be representative of a typical fishery year for either sector, and data for both recreational commercial fisheries from 2021 are still incomplete and preliminary. So as you can see on the next slide, here's the same graph, but for Scup. Again, the horizontal lines represent the example quotas and RHLs based on 2023 ABC, and the vertical dark bars are the recent landing. Finally, here's the exact same set of figures for black sea bass. You can see here, again, we have the new allocations highlighted in the different colors on those horizontal bars with landings in the gray bars. So the next set of considerations relates to phasing in any allocation changes over a set number of years. A phase-in approach would divide the percent shift in allocation evenly over the selected number of years if a reallocation is approved. In addition to a no phase-in option, these alternatives include a phase-in over 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years. The council and board could choose to apply a different phase-in approach to each species, and the impacts of these phase-in alternatives will depend on the specific allocation change for each species and the number of years of the phase-in. The details of the phase-in percent shifts under each alternative is shown in tables 11 through 13 in the decision document. Alternative set 2 considers allowing the transfer of quota between sectors in either direction during the annual specifications process. The first subset of alternatives in this section is either to take no action, under which transfers between sectors will not be allowed, or to allow for optional bidirectional transfers through the annual specification setting or review. The transfer would be specified as a percent of the total ABC in the form of a landings limit transfer. Transfers would not occur if the stock is overfished or if overfishing is occurring. There are also a few options for the caps on the total amount of an annual transfer. So these options are for no cap, a cap of 5, 10, or 15% of the ABC. The last alternative category to consider relates to the ability to change measures that are considered in this amendment through a future framework or addendum, as opposed to an amendment. This is a fairly simple alternative set that includes no action or making the issues considered in this amendment frameworkable, including commercial and recreational allocation and sector transfers. Allowing this could help in scenarios where small tweaks may be needed, but due to new information without going through the full amendment process. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Kylie to give us a brief recap of public comments and staff recommendations.
Right. Thanks, Savannah. So start with a very condensed recap of the public comments from earlier this year. In hearing and written comments, this slide summarizes what we heard on allocation. So 69% of commenters supported status quo, and that also matches the percentage of commenters that were affiliated with the commercial industry. So virtually all of the comments from commercial representatives supported status quo. Meanwhile, 15% of commenters supported an allocation change for at least one species. Generally, the commercial industry supported status quo with the rationale that the commercial sector can't afford to lose quota and livelihoods are at stake, and additionally that the public would lose access to seafood with lower commercial allocation. The recreational sector supported changes to allocations, with the most common rationale being that allocations should use the new MRIP data, which is the best available science, and that allocations should account for recent fishery conditions. There was also a tendency among those who supported an allocation change to favor catch-based allocations over landings-based. Next slide. For the other alternative sets, there were much more limited comments that we received on the phase-in provisions, especially as most comments did favor status quo allocations, so there would be nothing to phase in. Of those who commented on this issue, the majority supported no phase-in, alternative 1D1. For transfer provisions, we received 184 comments opposing transfers, which was 55% of the total comments, and only 18 comments in favor of transfers. Finally, for framework and addendum provisions, 178 supported no action, while 21 commenters spoke in favor of framework and addendum provisions. Next slide. So the FMAT last met in March, and at that meeting, the group did not feel comfortable recommending a specific allocation alternative or whether to reallocate. However, several FMAT members did speak in favor of catch-based allocations from a process and technical standpoint, and agreed that they would recommend moving from a landings-based to a catch-based allocation for summer flounder and black sea bass should the council and board choose to reallocate. Regarding phase-in, there was no specific recommendation from the FMAT. The impacts would depend on the allocation change selected, as well as future catch and landings limits over the phase-in period. The FMAT also recommended no action on transfer provisions, agreeing that in theory, this adds flexibility, but the way that it would be implemented in practice doesn't provide much benefit for these species. And finally, they recommended adopting framework and addendum provisions through alternative 3B, noting that it would be beneficial for minor adjustments in the future. Next slide. So council staff recommendations for each species are included in a December 2nd memo from council staff. We noted that the decision of whether to reallocate is a policy decision for the council and board, but we have species-specific considerations should you choose to reallocate. We also included recommendations for the other alternative sets, and we do recommend that the council and board take final action at this meeting, as any further postponement would continue to create uncertainty for stakeholders and managers and make implementation by 2023 difficult. Next slide. So the summer flounder recommendation is the same staff recommendation as you heard in April 2021. Staff agrees with catch-based allocations for summer flounder, and it is currently a landings-based allocation. Staff believes that updating the current base years with new data is a well-justified approach, but 1980 to 1989 can't be updated with catch information for summer flounder due to lack of dead discard data over this time period. And also we have no data from 1980 from the recreational fishery. Next slide. So in light of these considerations, council staff recommended alternative 1A5, 55% commercial, 45% recreational, based on 81 to 89 revised data. However, we recommended that this be applied to catch instead of landings, as is specified in 1A5. So in practice, as shown in a table in the staff memo, the ABC has averaged about 56% to the commercial fishery and 44% to the recreational fishery, given the way that discards have been distributed in recent years. So on a catch basis, this is actually likely to result in outcomes that are fairly close to status quo limits in the near term, depending on what's done with discards, trends, and projections in the future. Next slide. So example limits for this recommendation were calculated using the same methodology as applied elsewhere in the document using the 2023 ABC. Again, these are examples, and future limits depend on what's done with projected discards, but the actual 2023 limits are shown in comparison to the 2023 example limits under this recommendation here, and it would result in a 3% decrease in the commercial quota and a 7% increase in the recreational harvest limit, and that is the percent change relative to the actual 2023 limits. Next slide. For Scup, the recommendation was also unchanged from April. The allocation for Scup should remain catch-based. And staff also recommend consideration of updating the current base years with new data. Unlike for Black sea bass and summer flounder, the Scup stock biomass estimate did not increase after the incorporation of revised MRIP data. But staff believe the approach of revising the allocations using the same base years with updated data would allow for consideration of the Scup fisheries prior to influence of allocations and regulations on harvest constraints, and also use the best scientific information available for these fisheries in these base years. So council staff recommend alternative 1B2, and that would result in a 65% allocation to the commercial sector and 35% to the recreational sector. Next slide. Okay, so for black sea bass, the council staff did modify our recommendation compared to April 2021. The new recommendation is for alternative BSB4, which is one of the alternatives added in August of this year, and that is 40.5% commercial and 59.5% recreational catch-based allocation. This alternative uses that 50-50 weighting approach of the current base years with new data and recent years with RHL overage years excluded. So as previously described, we recommend moving to catch-based allocations for all three species. And we believe that this alternative does balance some of the trade-offs among sectors based on the example quotas and RHLs, which are shown on the screen here for this alternative. So staff also agree that the rationale for the 50-50 weighting approach does consider some of both the preferences of the commercial sector and the recreational sector in terms of using the base years and more recent years with RHL overage years excluded. Next slide. So in terms of fairness considerations, the example quota under BSB4 allows for a 19% increase in commercial landings compared to 2019. And that comparison to 2019 is relevant because the commercial quota and the RHL both increased by 59% between 2019 and 2020, largely due to the response of the assessment in incorporating the MRIP data into that assessment. However, there were other non-MRIP factors that did cause this increase, including the above average 2015 year class. So the quota also increased from 2020 to 2021 due to the council risk policy change, and the 2022 and 23 quotas are within 6% of 2021. So staff consider it reasonable for both the commercial and recreational sectors to see some benefits from the non-MRIP factors that led to the increased landings limits in 2020 and 2021. And this alternative allows the commercial sector to retain some of the increase that it received compared to 2019, but not the full 59% increase that they received. So this alternative will still require likely reductions in the recreational harvest to prevent RHL overages if the ABC remains similar to 2023, but staff don't believe it would be appropriate to constrain the commercial fishery to below pre-2019 levels with the sole purpose of preventing needs for restrictions in the recreational fishery. Next slide. So for phase-in provisions, council staff agreed with the FMAD. The benefits vary depending on the magnitude of change and the species. So we would also note that allocation changes expected to be implemented in 2023. Any phase-in would then take place over years of different assessment information. In 2023, we expect to have assessment updates that inform 2024 to 2025 catch limits, and we don't know what direction biomass projections will be going for any of our species, so we can't predict whether a phase-in approach may offset or compound any allocation change phase-in. So council staff prefer no phase-in, or if the council and board determine a phase-in is warranted, we would recommend the 2 years, which is alternative 1D2. Next slide. And regarding transfer provisions, council staff recommend no action. Alternative 2A, agreeing with the FMAT that there are process-related complexities with this, including difficulty determining the need for a transfer in any given year and the need to rely on prior year data. Next slide. For frameworks and addendum provision, council staff recommend 3B, which is to allow those changes through frameworks and addendum. We do note that we would not necessarily be able to do it in every case. It should still be considered on a case-by-case basis, and major changes should still be done through an amendment. Next slide. Okay, so that concludes our summary. Sorry for speeding through that, but in the interest of time, here we are with our decision points for commercial recreational allocation. There are alternative sets for each species, and then the phase-in alternative set, and the transfer provisions alternative set 2, and the framework and addendum provisions alternative set 3, and the council staff and FMAT recommendations where relevant are included on this slide. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for your presentation. Let me see if anybody has any questions at this point. Peter Hughes, go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kylie. Thank you, Savannah. Kylie, I thought I saw on an earlier slide the staff recommendation is 1A-5. Maybe that's my gibberish chicken scrawl handwriting, but confirm that for me?
Are you referring to summer flounder?
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, the recommendation was 1A5, but instead of applied to a landings-based allocation, applied to a catch-based allocation.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thanks, Kylie. Eric Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a question about public comment. I know there was a lot of public comment that came in late. And was that 69% in favor of status quo the total, or was that the total before late comment? And if late comment wasn't considered in that number, do you have any idea what the stance of all those late comments might be? And I have another question about procedure after that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Eric. We'll see if Kylie has anything to offer. Kylie?
The quantification that I provided was just from the public comment period and the written comment period earlier in 2021, and we did not do the same type of quantification and categorization of the comments that we received through email from, basically in the last couple months. So that is just the quantification that we did in the public comment summary document from our official public comment period earlier this year.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there's been a lot of public comment just in the last, even this morning. So, Mr. Chairman, my question to you is how do you want to handle this? You want to handle every species one at a time? Or do you want to, I mean, what are you planning on doing? And depending on your response, I will have a motion for you when you're ready.
Yeah, thanks for that, Eric. Yeah, I was just talking with Justin about procedure and taking all of these together or one at a time. I think I'll make that decision here in a minute with the help of Justin, kind of leaning towards maybe one at a time. I'll get some thoughts though. Give that, those of you around the table and board and council members, give it some thought. If you think we can accomplish this in one fell swoop, I'd be happy to put all of it together. Staff have recommendations that we could use as a basis for establishing a motion that would include all of the staff recommendations, and then we could modify that if you choose to. I haven't quite decided yet, Eric, if that was a roundabout way of saying I'm not sure yet, but
All right, Mike, well, no problem.
that
Well, you let me know,
decision.
and I have a motion whenever you're ready.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'll come back to you, Eric. I'm going to go to Shanna Madsen next. Shanna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a quick question to staff about, so for summer flounder, the council staff recommendation is using 1A5, but applied as catch. So you'd use the same percentages derived from those landings, but then apply that to catch. Is there the possibility of doing that with another species like black sea bass, using something like a 1C5 and then also taking those percentages and applying them to catch the same way that you're doing for summer flounder?
I believe yes, as long as it is within the range of what's previously considered, and we might be able to look at that quickly just to make sure that the outcomes, the example limits that we're looking at are within the range, but it may or may not be obvious that it's within the range, so we would have to just take a quick look at that, but that's definitely possible if it's within the range.
Okay, thanks. Did you have something in follow-up, Shanna?
No, just that I'd like to know and make sure that those are within the range.
Okay, thanks. Nicola Meserve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to staff for the efficient recap. I wanted to ask about the staff recommendation for black sea bass 4 option. And kind of why the rationale for that option did not also translate to summer flounder and scup. Part of the rationale that was given for the weighted option of the base years and the more recent years was to balance trade-offs, and it considered the very divergent commercial and recreational stakeholder comment, which I think, is in the record across all 3 species. So just curious to hear some more justification for why that also didn't relate to summer flounder and scup in the staff recommendations. Thanks.
Yes, so we actually did consider that as a staff recommendation for summer flounder. Just ended up going with the previous recommendation. Yeah, it's a little bit of a hard decision with all the different policy trade-offs. We ended up kind of sticking by the previous recommendation, but that 50-50 weighting one was considered as a staff recommendation.
Okay, thank you. It's gone. Eric's already done. Julia?
I just want to clarify that we don't have it in a slide, but staff did calculate that same idea for the staff recommendation for summer flounder, same base years, new data, but applied as catch instead of landings. That's not the recommendation for black sea bass, but we did calculate it. And the example quotas and RHLs are within the range of the other alternatives. So it could be an alternative that could be considered, and the justification's there for summer flounder, so it could probably be justified for black sea bass too.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the board or the council? Before I'm going to go to the audience for a question or two. If anyone has a question, this isn't the time for comment yet. I have Neil, Illinois.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, we hear you now.
I think this is terrific, but just one general comment about the overall thing is I was involved in fisheries in a party boat business 1974 before Magnuson, and I always remember at meetings people like Gordon Colvin and other people saying that that allocations aren't written in stone and they should be addressed from time to time. And I'm glad we're in this process of re-examining the allocation. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Mike Wayne, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if staff has this available, but in the black sea bass recommendation, they show what the increase in commercial quota is from 2019 under that weighted option. Do they have that same information for summer flounder and scup anywhere in the materials?
So in the materials, I believe for all 3 species in the tables, we have comparisons to the actual 2023 limits. For black sea bass, I think, and Julia may be able to elaborate on this, but I think part of the justification was related to 2019 harvest levels. And although the staff recommendation was changed from before, the previous staff recommendation had talked about allowing each sector to retain some of the increase that the fishery got between 2019 and 2020. And so 2019 levels of harvest were part of the justification, and I believe that's why that information was presented for black sea bass, and Julia might be able to explain that in more detail.
I don't have anything else to add, but Kylie's right. There's tables in there already showing a comparison to what's on the books right now to 2023. but we don't have that comparison to 2019 for the other species. It could be pretty easily calculated, but she's right, it was a special justification for black sea bass because of the big increase from 2019 going into 2020.
Okay, thanks, Julia. Thanks, Kylie. Greg DiDomenico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg DiDomenico, Lunds Fisheries. Just one quick request or question. Can the staff go back to the description of the fluke allocations as they really are, considering catch?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to understand what you're asking for, Greg. The
Charlie,
table.
one of your slides indicated that the actual allocations, while it being on the book 60-40, it's actually more like 55-45. Is that correct?
Yes, that is on slide 22. So there is a table in the decision document that describes this, or not the decision document, I'm sorry, the staff memo that describes this in more detail. So the current allocation for summer flounder is 60-40 landings allocation, but because of the way the discards get distributed in any given year, the actual split of catch of the ABC in the past, I think 10 years or so, has averaged 56% to the commercial fishery and 44% to the recreational fishery.
Thank you very much for pointing that out and making sure people realize that in reality, in practice, partial reallocation has already happened, and that in this particular case, they have not been held to their 40% allocation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris Ludford.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say briefly that it's just it's a bit frustrating for me, having been a member of the directed fishery in the early to mid 90s. I had to move into other fisheries because I did not hold a permit at the time. I was fishing with other people, other fishermen. You know, the industry was consolidated during the rebuild. And I'm talking about black sea bass now. I apologize. Black sea bass is my focus here. And as the resources rebuilt, you know, the effort shifted to recreational permits. Federal permits were consolidated, and fishermen, you know, were eliminated from the fishery. Now I'm being forced to have to buy my way back into the fishery, which is going to be even harder under this reallocation. So I just wanted to go on record to say that. And I'm a commercial fisherman in Virginia. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, seeing no additional hands at this time from members of the public, I'm going to come back to the council and board. I know Eric Reed has a motion that he'd like to make, but first, before that, I'm going to, Shannon Matson asked for a second for one last question, and then Eric, I'm going to come to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a real quick last question. From table 1 in the staff memo, which is the one that Greg was just referring to, do we have anything similar for black sea bass in any of the documents, the decision documents?
No.
I think actually that if you go to the phase-in impacts section in the decision document, there is table 9, which talks about how to move from a landing space to a catch-based allocation. And it talks about what the split is for 2022, but not going back as many years. So that talks about, this is specific to kind of how to transition from a landing space to a catch base or vice versa, but it looks at the split of the ABC into the commercial and recreational ACLs in 2022. For black sea bass, it looks like that is 54% commercial, 46% recreational. Yeah, so maybe that helps.
All right, thank you. Okay, Eric, I'm going to come back to you, and I've had no epiphany. as far as deciding on, so how did you want to proceed, Eric? Did you have a motion prepared with, I'm thinking maybe we could combine not the entire set of alternatives, but take the first set first, which would be the species-specific alternatives and then the phase-in, and consider that in one motion, and then move to transfers and frameworkability and two other motions. But let me get your thoughts as well.
Yeah, Mike, I appreciate that. I'm going to give you one motion. It's pretty short. And I have rationale. If I get a second for debate, I'd be happy to give you some rationale. The rationale applies across the board, and my motion, if you decided to divide the question, you could certainly do so pretty easily. So I move to adopt, this is for the board, I move to adopt the status quo alternatives for summer flounder, which is 1A4, Scup 1B1, and black sea bass 1C4 as final preferred alternatives for the commercial recreational reallocation amendment. Like I said, if I get a second, I have some rationale. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric. And let me ask you, Rick Bellavance, who I know is sitting in for you as the liaison to the New England Council, had to step away. He had to leave due to, he had to catch a flight. So would you be willing to stand in as the New England liaison and make that on behalf of the council as well?
Yeah, I would love to, Mike, but you never let me do it before. I'm happy to do it now if you want.
Sorry about that, Eric. Yeah, sorry about that. We'll stick to the way we had it originally. So Eric Reed has made this motion on behalf of the board. Do I have a second from a board member? Shanna Matson, are you seconding this motion? Okay. And I'll turn now to the council. Is there anyone on the council that would like to make this motion? If you can raise your hand, anyone on the council wants to make the motion for status quo? I have Sonny Gwynn, seconded by Dewey Hemmelwright. Okay. All right, now that we have an official motion, Eric, sorry about the confusion. If you have rationale you'd like to provide, now's the time. Thanks.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I do appreciate the opportunity to participate in the council as well, Mike. Thank you. So firstly, final action was delayed in April, 7 months ago, to better inform and build up the rec reform initiative to develop a variety of rec management measures. As of today, we've got nothing. Secondly, reallocation from a limited access, highly regulated fishery to an open access fishery is not efficient or effective, and it's counterproductive and will cause undue harm on the former. And that is against National Standard 8. Reducing commercial catch by decreasing or reallocating quota will threaten food production and food safety, as well as reduce efficiency and adversely affect communities. That is contrary to National Standard 1, 4, 5, 7, and 8. Increasing availability to an open access fishery without effective and enforceable management or improved data collection does not solve or address management issues and does not protect the resource either. Excuse me. No consideration for the for-hire charter sector is pending or able to be addressed today. MRIP, it has been said that improves our knowledge of the rec fishery and the total biomass. It also improves our knowledge of rec overages and over multiple years and management shortfalls, which reallocation alone doesn't address. And lastly, I just want to remind everybody, Gideon versus Pritzker. And that was a court decision that specifically said that a sector cannot be rewarded for going over their prescribed limit year after year. And that's case law, and I've mentioned it every time that we talk about it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's my rationale.
All right, thank you, Eric. Next, I'm going to turn to Shanna Matson for any additional rationale on the motion. Shanna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually don't have additional rationale. I just really wanted to be able to hear this discussed, as I know that it's a very important topic, and we've been hearing a lot about status quo, so I think it should see its seat at the table.
Okay, thanks, Shanna. Sonny Gwynn?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I could go on and give you all kinds of rationale. but believe me, probably take me till way after 7 o'clock. So with that, I think Eric Reed hit the nail on the head. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thanks, Sonny. And Dewey.
Yeah, I agree with Eric's comments. One thing I've always particularly is how, even if there's a reallocation of the quota, is how to control the effort. And I believe we're still having problems with MRIP and the numbers that come out of there. So that's where I stand. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dewey. So if I could ask Eric, Sonny, and Dewey, put your hands down, it will help me a little bit. So I'm going to go next to Adam Nowalski. Go ahead, Adam.
Thank you very much. I've done my level-headed best to be consistent today in my thoughts about how the recreational sector should be held accountable to their recreational harvest, and I'll try to do so again. I appreciate the sentiment of those parties that have put this motion together, the willingness of another council member offered up for debate. I can speak towards myself. I've received well over 100 public comments in the last 72 to 96 hours in favor of some of the more liberal-leaning recreational alternatives. I think a lot of those comments that I received have been focused on using MRIP in the most recent years. And while I appreciate that sentiment, I think to support that approach here today would be contrary to what I argued against earlier today, using MRIP as it stands. So I think there is a slate of middle ground approaches that have been brought before us. I think Mr. Reed's comments about concerns about rewarding a sector for any reported overages, that was a cause for delay by these joint bodies. And I appreciate the work of those individuals that brought forward some new options this summer that address that very concern. The 50-50 weighted averages between historical and recent that took out the overages of the RHL. I think that offers a way forward that is a balance of how MRIP was intended to be used as a long-term understanding of how the fishery was performing, provides a balance between history and current, and takes away that concern that we had about rewarding a sector. So with that said, Mr. Chairman, and you don't need to come back to me after I do so, assuming I get a second, I will make a motion to substitute Fluke 4, Scup 4, and BSB 4. And that was for both the council and the commission. Thank you. And that was intended, if you'd like me to read that out entirely, I moved to substitute, I moved to adopt options Fluke 4, Scup 4, and BSB 4 as preferred alternatives for the commercial recreational reallocation amendment. I apologize for that.
That's much better, thanks. That's what we were discussing, Adam. Thank you. Okay, so Adam Nowalski has made a motion to substitute, made on behalf of the board and the council. Is there a second on behalf of either the board or the council, or for somebody sitting with two hats on, or both? Joe Semino, will you make that on behalf of the board and the council? Oh, right, you're right, okay. So we have a second by Joe Semino on behalf of the council, and I'll look to the board. Emerson Hasbrook. Are you making that motion on behalf of the board?
No, my hand was up to comment on the underlying motion or the original motion, Eric
That's
Reed's
fine.
motion.
Yep, that's why I can try to confirm with you. Nicola, you're next. You want to support that or not support it, but make that motion on behalf of the board? Okay, I'm getting a nod in the affirmative. So we have a motion for debate and discussion. Adam said he did not need me to come back to him. I'll go to Joe next, and then Nicola will give you a shot, and then we'll hit the list. Go ahead, Joe.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This alternative came out of something that was put together, and I appreciate all the work that Nicola did on that and staff for going through that document and verifying the legitimacy of this as an option. Getting to something that Eric Reed said, that the AP and the monitoring committee said, RHL overages are removed from these options. I think that's important. These are the 50-50 weighted options that do look at the new years, which, the rec community is pointed out is incredibly important after revisiting this allocation scheme after so long. And yet it does give some, consideration to older years. And I think this is so important because we've never had an issue quite this complex. We're not capable of rewriting history, but that's exactly what you would have to do in the situation that we were handed. The new MRIP estimates didn't just change the percentages of what would have happened then. It would have changed everything. It would have changed our understanding of the stock, the recommendations for what was a safe, allowable catch, and proceeding year from year, everything that would have happened would have been different. So I think the only way to help address that at this point is to have a wide variety of years that are in there for consideration. I don't think we have another option that does that. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Joe. Nicola?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Support the substitute, and I think this is the set of options that best balances the historical fisheries dependence and also recent fisheries performance. As I said earlier, there's a wide spread in the public input on this matter, and today's word of the day may be compromise. I think we've, as a board and council, made similar decisions that tried to balance those needs when we looked at the commercial state-by-state allocations for sea bass and fluke, and even on the commercial recreational allocation decision for bluefish, where we incorporated 1981 to 2018 catch in that reallocation decision. So I think it is time that we seek to modernize these allocations to some degree and recognize shifting fishing patterns and species distribution, and which affects how the sectors access the resources. And a fishery like Scup reduce some of the quota underutilization there that can better maximize the benefits for all of our resource users. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicola. Okay, I'm going to go down my list. I've got a few hands at this time. I'll start with Dan Farnham. Dan?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for clarity, I've been going back and forth with staff on this particular alternative or suite of alternatives. To be clear, when the years that you've excluded years where the rec exceeded their RHL according to old MRIP. But when you do your calculations, your comparisons for the landings between the commercial and the recreationals, do you use old MRIP landings or new MRIP landings?
It's new MRIP is used in those calculations.
Now, follow up, please, Mr. Chair. So if I'm understanding correctly, right, the rationale for that to use new landings is because you want to manage the recreational fisheries according to new MRIP, and you're assuming that the RHL would have been higher had you used new MRIP. Is that correct?
I think the rationale is incorporating the best scientific information that we have available for those years.
Well, for me, it's voodoo math. If you're going to eliminate years where the RHL has been exceeded, then you should use the old MRIP numbers that you use to eliminate those years. Like, I'm going to take each species one by one here. For summer flounder, for the time series for the years that were being used for this alternative, the commercial sector caught 94% of its quota. Under old MRIP numbers, the recreational sector caught 77%. Once you use new MRIP, those landings go to 180%. So 80% over the RHL. For black sea bass, 81% of the quota was caught by the commercial sector. And under old MRIP numbers, and this is why you kept those years, old MRIP numbers, the average is 69% for the recreational catch. But when you turn those landings into new MRIP numbers, all of a sudden you ballooned up to 139% of landings, well over the threshold. And I'll do the same thing for Scup. I don't have the commercial landings for Scup. I didn't have time, but under old MRIP, the recreational catch was 72%, and it balloons up to 160%. And that's 60% over the RHL. So to me, I just don't see the rationale. I do appreciate the time you put into it. I do, I understand it, but for me, looking at it from my end of it, I cannot support it. I can't use the math. If you're assuming that the RHL would have been higher using new MRIP, well, then you're also assuming the ABC would have been higher and the commercial quota would have been higher, and the commercial sector would have caught a lot more fish than they did. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Chris Batsavage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe and Nicola, I support the substitute motion. Joe and Nicola mentioned many of the reasons why I do, but I think the more important ones are, just how we've done things here recently with other allocation actions, especially since we've had allocations like this in place for a long time. Making a big shift after a couple decades of the same allocations is not an approach we've done on other actions. I don't think we should do it on this. Admittedly, the data in more recent years is more reflective of what's going on and more accurate, quite frankly, when you think about MRIP improving over the time series and mandatory commercial landings programs being put in place, such as what we have in North Carolina in the 90s. With that being said, though, I think it's definitely appropriate to have a weighting scheme where we use some of the older time series to balance out those years, removing the years where RHL was exceeded. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Mike Pentney.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to abstain on this motion, and probably if there are any other motions. But I do want to just remind the council that it's going to be really important, whatever alternatives are selected, that the council very clearly articulates the rationale in terms of how any reallocation is in the best interests of the nation. And I stress that because, as Eric Reed mentioned, there is this previous court case out there where a similar amendment by a different council was struck down by a court because the court viewed it as a reallocation to reward one sector for its overages over another sector. Now, I think the motion that's on the floor may avoid that specific concern because of the way it's it's eliminated some of the years where those overages occurred at the time, at least based on what we knew at the time. But it's still, again, going to be very important for the council to clearly articulate, a strong rationale consistent with the national standards, using the best available science, balancing various policy decisions in order for this to move forward through secretarial review. And I don't have a specific issue with this particular alternative. As I said, I will abstain. But again, ultimately, it's going to be really important to articulate that rationale so that it's not perceived as just reallocating from the commercial sector to the recreational sector because the recreational sector caught more than we realized they did. There has to be some other strong rationale that demonstrates, that the change is in the best interest of the nation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Bill Hyatt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to speak in support of the substitute motion for reasons that have already been mentioned, but mainly because I think it reflects a balance. I think it reflects fairness by eliminating the overage years. And I think it demonstrates a willingness to consider new data and new realities. And I think that last point is very important for credibility with the public. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Tom Foti.
Yeah, I could use Eric's point by point on the recreational sector here. Let's look back at what happened. When and I'm going to give a little history lesson because I've been around for all those years. When basically the yellowtail fishery first got shut down in New England in the 80s, the fleet, and they found out where the summer flounder was spawning, not only did the Mid-Atlantic fleet went out there, but the New England fleet, because they couldn't fish for yellowtail, basically hammered those stocks over years. So they actually overinflated what they had because the historical records that are available, which are from the Bureau of Sport Fisheries, said it was a 70-30 recreational catch before that period of time. Then as we look here, we basically look at, we set up the quotas wrongly when we basically did it because we didn't have good MREPS numbers. We didn't have good MERPS numbers, as we called them back then. And we rewarded the sector that basically collapsed the fishery, and we did that. We did it in a number of fisheries, especially bluefin tuna and anything else, but we're talking about summer flounder here. We also, when 2019, when we walked into a room and found out for the first time, they were giving a 49% increase based on this number. I didn't see any of these people that are talking today objecting to that 49% increase in the commercial fishery. And we didn't object to it. Matter of fact, I wrote an article in support of it because we had underestimated the numbers. But when Adam Nowalski made it, because of the data and because of the numbers, made a 3.5% increase we wanted in the recreational sector, we got turned down. Wouldn't even be 3.5. I didn't support it. I wanted a 7.5. But that we'll leave that there also. As we look at what happens here, we basically have done that constantly. We have basically pushed this fishery because we have raised the size limit. You know, when I first got involved, it was New York and New Jersey had 14-inch size limits. None of the United States had any size limits. And even in New Jersey was the only one with a bag limit. As we basically increased the size limit and reduced the bag limit to try to stay in these RHL because we underestimated the stocks, we actually started pushing the fishermen for less and less catch. We are standing here now that in 2021, that recreational fishermen are catching 25% of the fish they were catching back when we started this process. And you say, well, how's that possible? We're catching the same poundage. But a few people are catching bigger fish. And a lot more recreational anglers are basically not catching any fish because of the size limits. We pushed them out of the market. And this is a fish that spawns at 13 inches. The other problem is the industry has suffered. We've lost so many party boats and charter boats. And again, this is an industry. When we look at the recreational fishing industry, ASA, boat manufacturing, everything depends on this industry. We have pushed the assistant fishermen that the only way they can catch fish is by poaching because we basically shut them out of the fish. I know NIPS is looking at environmental justice and how do we ever cover those facts that we push the assistant, the poor, from taking 8 fish home deep because they can't afford to have a boat or go out fishing. So there's a lot of things that affect the public here. So when people used to go out, when I grew up, we used to go out to Sheepshead Bay in the, in the 50s, it was in the 60s, and basically harvest fish and take them home for our family to eat. I mean, nowadays, I went out fishing with bluefish and I had 3 12-inch fish, so there was enough fillets for me to eat, but not the rest of my family. So basically, what I'm looking at this as a way of starting to address some of the problems. Do I think it should have been a bigger percentage for the recreational? Yeah, but it's a compromise. And that's why I support the 50-50.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Before we go any further, and I will call on the other members that have their hands up, I've received a few correspondence from staff regarding adding some additional detail to the motion being considered. I don't know if that was, I guess we'll focus on the substitute at this point. As far as the percentages for each for both commercial and recreational, I believe that language has been worked up. Adam, Nicola, and Joe, would you be okay with just adding a little more detail here for somebody who's reading this motion that doesn't have all the other detail in front of them? Good. Okay, I've got thumbs up from everyone. So, Charlie, while we're making the while we're listening to some additional comment, if you want to get that up, or whoever's doing it back, I can't tell who's manipulating it. Okay. All right, so now we have the substitute just with additional detail. I'm going to go next to Emerson Hasbrook, and then Jim Gilmore, you're after Emerson. Go ahead, Emerson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the substitute motion, and I support the original motion. I think the public hearing record, as well as recent comments, are pretty clear on what the public wants. The public wants status quo. This message came through pretty clear at all the public hearings and in recently submitted public comments. I think we also need to manage expectations here a little bit. I've said it on the record before, and I'll say it again. Reallocation will not be a panacea for managing recreational fisheries. It will not keep us from having to make hard decisions on recreational measures as we had to do earlier today. And relative to Mike Pentney's point about benefits to the nation, this discussion is not just a recreational commercial issue. Consumers are also part of this discussion. You know, I represent the 20 million residents of the state of New York, more residents than most other East Coast states. And in New York, as well as other states, most of those residents access their fish, and those fish belong to them as much as it belongs to commercial and recreational sectors. They access their fish by buying it at restaurants, fish markets, and grocery stores. Far more people access their fish by buying it, not catching it. I have a program in New York going on now to promote the consumption of local seafood. And I know that Rhode Island and Massachusetts, and probably other states as well, have similar programs to promote the consumption of local seafood. So let's support those local seafood programs and consumers by having local seafood available to them, not less seafood. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Emerson. Jim Gilmore.
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
We can now, Jim. Go ahead.
Okay. So, you know, this is a difficult thing for all of us, and I understand, quite frankly, I started off, and I agree with Emerson in the beginning, I've got a deluge of stuff from the commercial fishing industry, but then in the last week, we've gotten a deluge from the recreational fishery. So, and again, it makes it somewhat difficult. Now, I think, and my opinion has been that, you know, we haven't had any change in allocation for decades. And if we don't do something now, we're looking at another decade before we do anything to really address this. So I'm in favor of some kind of a change. but recognizing that, this is classic with allocation. Someone will lose, someone will win. So to minimize that, there's some other options that I think if the reallocation does go forward, that it would be less of an impact on the commercial side. Question, is it appropriate? I believe under Robert's rules, we can go down 3 levels with a substitute, and if that's appropriate, would like to provide a substitute motion.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Jim, and I think there still will be an opportunity for that. I'd prefer to leave just having 2 layers right now, and we'll take up the question on the substitute and whether or not it fails or prevails. There'll be an opportunity for making it another substitute motion, depending on what becomes the main motion. That's how I'd like to proceed. It keeps it
That's fine, Mr. Chairman.
as simple as it can be, as complicated as it is, and I think it's just helpful for everyone. That's how I'd like to proceed.
Yeah, that's fine, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, I'll come back to you then. After I get a couple more hands, we'll take a break for a caucus and consider some of these motions. So next I have Peter Hughes, and then Sonny Gwynn, you're after Peter. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't necessarily support this motion to substitute, move to substitute. I could probably support the staff recommendations before I could support this or the underlying motion of status quo. But I guess my question is, no matter what suite of alternatives are chosen, what are the accountability measures that are going to be associated with them? And in the commercial fishery, I believe it's a pound for pound payback on a yearly basis or every other year. What are we doing for the RHL? Where are the accountability measures that are associated with these? And, I don't know where I'm going to go yet. I might move to substitute, but I just have not been able to find what the accountability measures are that the recreational harvest would be subjected to in comparison to the commercial sector. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. And, staff can go through the step-by-step details of the accountability measures, but they are built in for the recreational fishery. I believe it's based on the ACL. An ACL overage would require a payback, and depending on the biomass level and the health of the stock, there's a difference in payback. I could be off a little bit there. I'll look to maybe Kylie to help with that. But there is accountability on the side of the recreational fishermen based on the allocation that they receive and through the RHL to the ACL. Kylie?
Yeah, I recapped them a little bit in my summer flounder presentation earlier. So it is based on a 3-year moving average in the recreational fishery of the recreational dead catch to the recreational average ACL. And they are summarized in the staff recreational memos, I believe, and in my staff presentation for summer flounder recommenders.
Yeah, that presentation feels like it was given about a week ago right now. But thank you for that answer. I hope that helps, Peter. Let me go next to Sonny Gwynn, and then Shanna, you're on deck. Sonny?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm not going to support the substitute motion. And one of the reasons is, back when we started with the bluefish public hearings, there was so many people all the way up through Scup, black sea bass, flounder, bluefish public hearings. There's a lot of talk on emirate numbers. We don't believe it. The recs don't believe it. There was a lot of talk about wasn't correct up till I believe Connecticut even at this meeting was talking about emirate, how these numbers, something's wrong with them. And I understand it's the best available science. That's all we got. But when we start looking at cutting black sea bass, scup, and flounder from the commercial sector, we're cutting it from the consumer. And if we look at other fisheries like, well, let's replace the consumer. Let's let them go eat mahi. where the wrecks get 70-some%, or let's give them some rockfish. The wrecks get 80-some%, or let's give them some redfish. They don't get none. And the list can go on and on and on. And we just keep cutting and cutting and cutting until pretty soon people are come down to eat fresh fish. There's not going to be much fresh fish. And we always talk about 90-some% of our seafood is imported. And now I'm beginning to understand why. And believe me, I'm all for wreck satisfaction. I came from a wreck family. That's how I got to be where I am today. But I'm here on this world to feed people that cannot go fishing for themselves, depend on going to the restaurants, depend on going to the fish stores. And to me, this is just not, it's just like we're cherry picking this information to come to an outcome. And I'm going to stay with the first motion. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thanks, Sonny. Shanna?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, echoing some of the feelings that I'm hearing around the table, obviously, this is a really tough decision. We've heard from both of our sectors here, and this is an important issue to them both. I did want to take a moment to point out that in staff recommendation for BSB 4, they did not believe that they wanted to constrain the commercial black sea bass harvest to levels below the 2019 coastwide quota for that fishery. But due to the changes in the state-by-state allocations, they will definitely be lower for certain states, Virginia being one of them. The Virginia black sea bass fishery would see an approximate 10% decrease from their 2019 quota as a result of this action, compiled with the previous action of reallocating state-by-state black sea bass quota. Listening to some of the arguments around the table, I will say that I am in agreement that we need to do something here. I think global data, and that means the updated data, and the best scientific information for all of those years while still giving consideration to the base years. I wanted to put on the record that if this substitute motion does not pass, I am willing to make a motion for staff recommendation for summer flounder and scup while substituting the percentages from 1C5 for black sea bass, but applying that to catch. That would be similar to what the staff recommendation was for summer flounder. I think that this is a fair compromise, and in its simplest form, it does solve the mismatch in the mathematical issues that we're seeing here by updating those base years and still using the best available data, which is defensible to our public. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Shanna. And thanks for kind of projecting your thoughts as to what would happen in the event that this motion either fails or prevails. Either way, there would be an opportunity, as both you and Jim have suggested, that you could make a motion to substitute for the new main motion after we take a vote. So thanks for that. Michelle Duval, I have you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I agree with Shannon and others around the table that I don't think status quo is really an option. We've incorporated the new MRIP information as best scientific information available into our stock assessment. So, but I have also struggled with this decision. I think the part that I have struggled with the most is catch-based versus landings-based. Maybe there will be some other comments from folks around the table with respect to additional rationale for how they've come to that conclusion. I do support these weighted approaches because I do think they emphasize the importance of that historical nature of the fishery and recognizing that there have been businesses that have been built upon that, but also bringing our more recent information into the management process. So I've been supportive of those 50-50 weighted approaches. What I have struggled with really is the landings versus catch base. I did just want to note one other thing. Mr. Pentney mentioned a previous legal case, and I believe that part of the crux of that case was that particular council was trying to reallocate based on a specific percentage of the increased ABC from the MRIP recalibration that could be attributed to the recreational sector. So I think that that is a very different thing than what we are trying to do here today, which is update a suite of years with new and improved information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
You bring my drink in?
Scott Lennox, you'll be our last comment, and then I'm going to go to the public, but it's going to be brief. To get a couple comments from the public before we caucus and vote the substitute either up or down. But I'll go to Scott Lennox first. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Mike, before I even joined the council, I think that one of the first meetings I ever saw you at was the meeting where the 49% increase for the commercial quota for Flounder was being talked about. And you and I spoke briefly about how we thought that would be a problem in the future. And now here we are. I'm one of the loudest opponents for MRIP and using that data in management, just because I think it's severely flawed. I think it's the broken spoke in the wheel that nobody wants to seem to fix. But that being said, if we're going to use it to reallocate 49% of a flounder catch to the commercial based on recommendation, I also think we need to use it when reallocation is the recommendation. So, you know, we're seeing flounder, scup, and sea bass off of our coast here in Maryland. I think recreational anglers are going to be in a tough spot next when they find out about this 28% decrease in the sea bass catch. And I really hope that we can fix that with this reallocation. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and take a couple comments from members of the audience. I'll start with Paul, and then I have Megan Lapp, and then Bonnie Brady. We'll start with those three. Go ahead, Paul.
Thank you. Paul Hartel from the Jersey Coast Anglers Association. We represent about 75 fishing clubs throughout our state and thousands of fishermen, yet our comments were only counted as one. However, I'd like to point out back in the 70s, it was widely accepted that recreational fishermen accounted for a much higher percentage of the catch and landings of fluke, scup, and sea bass than commercial fishermen. Eventually, it was decided that quotas needed to be established and that percentages of the allocation would be split between the commercial and recreational sectors. However, regarding fluke and MFS, numbers were used by ASMFC and MAFMC in setting up the base years that favored the commercial fishermen after they had devastated the stock. This occurred because during the fall and winter, commercial fishermen found that the fluke were concentrated on far offshore near the continental shelf. They then approved a 60-40 split favoring the commercial fishermen when the split probably should have been the other way around based on historical data. Then in 2018, the MRIP numbers were recalculated and the revised estimates revealed that recreational fishermen had caught far more fish than originally believed, going back to 1981. That in turn caused our fisheries managers to conclude that the stock biomass for fluke, scup, and sea bass was significantly higher than previously estimates had shown. Regarding fluke, the higher biomass estimate resulted in a 49% increase in a quota for commercial fishermen and a 49% increase in the RHL for recreational fishermen. However, regulations for recreational fishermen could not be liberalized because the previous year's landings estimate indicated they were already equal to the 2019 recreational limit. Now, this is the most important thing I have. The allocation percentages for all three species do not reflect the current understanding of the recent and historic proportions of catch and landings between the two sectors. In other words, the heart of the problem is that though the revised data revealed that recreational fishermen were responsible for a much higher percentage of the catch, the split between the two sectors could not be changed without an amendment. We now have that amendment before us, and that is why we're asking you to rectify the situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Megan Lapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Megan Lapp Seafreeze. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Megan.
Thank you. In today's discussion so far, the council took action on spec setting for these species. According to MRIP, there should have been an 81% increase in fluke. But because neither staff nor the council believed MRIP, the council voted on a 16.5% increase instead. On Scup, the MRIP data combined with the Magnuson Act required a 56% reduction, according to new MRIP. But the council chose to ignore MRIP and Magnuson and implemented a 33% reduction instead. On black sea bass, the monitoring committee didn't even provide the council with a Magnuson compliant advice because in its opinion, Magnuson didn't matter. At its next council meeting, the council will be acting on the harvest control rule, which again does not hold the recreational sector to an RHL. The commercial industry is held accountable, the recreational sector is not. That is a National Standard 4 violation, and a National Standard 4 violation is why the rec sector has already lost reallocation in court previously. During this action, during scoping, 70% of the comments were received from the commercial industry for status quo. For final action, the council comments received are probably 99% status quo. And those comments don't just come from commercial fishing vessel owners. They come from union workers. They come from people in minority groups. They come from people who sell fish to people who eat it in different places in this country. The regional administrator just mentioned the overall benefit to the nation. Well, the commercial sector feeds the nation. And based on the fact that the council doesn't want to hold the recreational sector accountable anyway, which is very clear in its action so far today, taking away allocation from the commercial sector and giving it to the recreational sector impacts the nation very negatively because the recreational sector will do what it wants regardless of an RHL. The commercial sector for all these years has been held hard tax, taken observers, reported, been boarded by the Coast Guard, been boarded and checked at the dock with people carrying guns to make sure that they did what they were supposed to or they were going to jail. When stocks dropped, we paid the price. When regulations tightened, we were told, hang it out, hang in there, tough it out, and you'll reap the rewards later. Now that the commercial sector has rebuilt the fluke, scup, and sea bass stocks to their current levels, the council is saying we'll lose quota just because a change needs to be made. The change that needs to be made is recreational accountability. That's the change that needs to be made. Under old MRIP, there were serious overages. This is not a new problem. This is an old problem. In the particular motion up on the board right now, those years of overages under old MRIP were taken out. But the years left still treat the commercial and recreational sectors differently. And the council will be very aware of this because recently the council used new MRIP to feed into the operational assessment for fluke. When that assessment was updated with new MRIP data, the overall ABC went up substantially because the conclusion was that the stock was actually higher. As a result, the commercial quota was raised as well as the RHL being raised. During the years contemplated by this motion, the new MRIP numbers were not fed into the corresponding assessment and resulting ABCs. If they had been, commercial landings also would have been higher because our ABC would have been higher. And staff notes in documents before the council today that the commercial always harvests quota. If the science at the time had incorporated new MRIP, our commercial landings and the overall ABC would have been higher. Unless staff goes back in time, reworks what the ABCs would have been had the new MRIP numbers been used in assessments, and update the stock size during those years, and then update the allowable commercial landings, this alternative also violates National Standard 4, which again is what shot down reallocation in the Gulf of Mexico, because it treats different sectors differently, and that is inequitable and violates National Standard 4. You would be allowing higher rec landings in an equation, a math equation, while suppressing commercial landings in that same equation. It's math. I cannot support the motion on the board today. I can only support status quo and action by this council that holds the recreational sector accountable, because if the recreational sector receives more quota and is not held accountable, the entire stock drops and commercial is the only sector that pays. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Megan. Okay, seeing a list of hands steadily growing, what I'd like to do at this point is I'm going to ask those folks who have their hands up at this time to recognize yourself and directly state whether or not you support currently the motion to substitute or the main motion. And then I'd like to give you maybe 60 seconds for any rationale that hasn't already been considered by comments previously made or comments submitted to the council and the board on this action. I would like to give everyone an opportunity, but if we're going to just keep that comment directed to the motions before us, and then a few 30 seconds to a minute's worth of rationale.
Hey,
Thank you
Mike,
for that.
excuse me, do I get to speak at the regular time since my hand was up first?
You're next, Bonnie. No,
Great.
I'm going to ask you if you can, let us know which.
I will speak as quickly as possible.
Thank you.
My
Go
name is
ahead, Bonnie.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead.
Super. My name is Bonnie Brady. I represent the Long Island Commercial Fishing Association. We represent fishermen throughout Long Island. We can only support not the motion to substitute, but the motion that was initially on the floor for status quo for the various reasons. Commercial fishermen feed the nation. We understand that there are issues with the recreational, but at the same time, hindcasting for one sector, as in going back and deciding never, ever taking a look at how many fishermen are in all those other states that weren't counted initially. And we all know about the 30-year fight of New York. I don't feel that math is appropriate. What we do is feed the nation. You will notice on my letter that I submitted quite late and that I think I sent around to a majority of the members. There are literally hundreds of people within just the Hunts Point area where I actually got to go visit for a couple of days this weekend. They come from all walks of life, every single ethnicity, the unions, the fish cutters, you name it. From about at least, I saw on the floor, 10 different ethnic groups of people, all hardworking, middle-class people that are trying to get a foot up in life, not even maybe middle class, but first-generation Americans that are trying desperately to work hard in the literal dead of night to provide food from the nation. 1 million pounds of seafood goes through those doors every single day. And the people that work there and the people from the Korean Seafood Association that represent thousands of retail owners and supermarkets that provide inexpensive seafood to our nation. We're not talking about tuna or wahoo or whatever it is. We're talking about the simple scup and black sea bass and fluke for special occasion. Coast-wide cuts of the numbers that are looked at when we're talking about the 4 Bs. So you're talking about, for fluke, a cut of 12%. For scup, you're looking about a 23% cut. And where is the other one? Hold on, I got my state. For black sea bass, a 27% coast-wide will close markets of certain states like New York, which I believe is against National Standard 8. There has to be some parity and some fairness. Recreational folks can go out and catch it, and I know some of them actually go out and catch it to eat it. I get that. And the party boat, head boat guys, they need some help, but it doesn't make any sense to take supply food for all of those folks that live in Manhattan in some ethnic neighborhood that have never even seen the ocean, but want to have a chance to eat a fresh meal. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Bonnie. Next, if we could try to stick to just about a minute or so, that would be very helpful. So if you can't stick to a minute in comment, I'm going to have to cut it short. We're under a crunch here. We have a hard stop at 7 o'clock. And so I want to make sure that we have ample time and enough time to debate and vote these motions up or down. I'm going to go next to Mike Wayne. Go ahead, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mike Wayne with the American Sport Fishing Association. I just want to highlight that from a recreational standpoint, summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass are food fish fisheries. Anglers going out to catch these fish to bring them home to eat. We've seen a lot of growth in the recreational sector in the most recent years, especially because of the pandemic. People are turning to recreational fishing to put food on the table. The biggest growth we've seen in our sport is from women and minorities. People really getting encouraged by the possibility of getting to go out and catch a fish and bring it home. And these allocation decisions are going to directly impact their ability to do that. And I think it's noble that to address the issues of fairness and equity, RHL overages have been removed from the data set. That's what the substitute motion reflects. And I believe the most recent time frame better reflects recent improvements to both recreational and commercial data reporting and the distribution and availability of the resource. So I urge everyone to support the substitute motion, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Dave Arapak.
Hi, this is Dave Arapach, fishing vessel Kate Leonard Marade, Montauk, New York, 66 years old, been fishing all my life. I have been told from the beginning, I've been here even probably as long as Tom Foti or longer. I was a ground fish advisor, a fluke advisor. We were told by John Bryson years ago, look, guys, we know it hurts, but you can tuck it in right now, and then you're going to reap rewards later on. We're not getting rewards. We've been held to a hard quota. We have boat tracks on the boat that tells the government where we are. We have to report within hours of landing the fish. We have to electronically report to the government every single pound. It's double checked in the market. They have to report with before the day is over that they've received it. And it's this absolutely recreational. I don't want to hurt them. I'm not asking for any of their fish, but they go hog wild. They have gone hog wild. The guy just before me, he said, well, the recreational fishery is increasing. Yeah, no kidding. You have no backstop on it. You're not stopping them, but you're stopping me. There's less fishing boats now, draggers, than there were. There's, no young guys want to get into this business because we've been held down for so long. I want to get fish back. At some point, I'd like to see, the recreational were going 700-800% over on the fluke back when I was the fluke advisor. Non-stop, they were doing that, 600-300%. Hey, look, I'm being reasonable here because I know that there's no way logistically that the National Marine Fisheries or the DEC can rein these people in. I understand that. You can't be everywhere, but you can certainly be at every fishing boat, every dragger, gill netter, lobster boat, or whatever that comes in every time it comes into the dock. And we're electronically tracked so they know where we are. There's no way you should be giving out more fish now, rewarding them for data that says that, and it blows my mind. You're talking about taking data out of the data set that they went over so that it makes it legal. I don't know. This is like bizarro world. I can't agree with this additional amendment. I want status quo. There's nothing else is fair.
Okay, thanks for your comment. Let's go to, we'll go to Greg DiDomenico next, and then there are a handful more. I am going to cut off the comment in about 5 minutes. So let's try to please stick to the time allowed, and then we're going to move on. So if you're on the list and we run long, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to move on. Greg DiDomenico, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's Greg DiDomenico, Lunds Fisheries. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead, Greg.
All right. You're going to put a time constraint on me, so I'm going to have to be as blunt as possible, so you'll have to forgive me. First of all, this is one of the more demoralizing moments in the 17 years that I've been at the Mid-Atlantic Council. And I say that in all honesty, if you consider the dozens and dozens and dozens of frameworks, and full amendments just imposed on the commercial fishery, you can understand just how demoralizing this is. We've not done a single meaningful action or change to address recreational problems in the 17 years that I've been attending Mid-Atlantic Council meetings. But now here we are, and the only choice we have is to lose. First of all, I have to admit, and everybody I hope agrees, allocations are meaningless if they are not adhered to. They've already caught their reallocation, and that is obvious. How can we have MRIP for allocation, but MRIP not for accountability? There is a severe design constraint in what you are proposing today, and that is very simple. You're not going to solve or address the recreational problems. You're going to lose something, though. You're going to lose your ability to properly manage these fisheries. You're going to lose mortality, control of the mortality. You're going to lose certainty, and you're going to have a dramatic effect on the science and management of these stocks. You can't have flexibility and stability and less restrictions for recreational fishing and have accountability, precaution, and rebuilding. We have a finite resource and we have to use it wisely. This is not a wise use of it. And for those reasons, I support status quo and I oppose the substitute motion in total. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Greg. We have heard a number of comments regarding the interest in a status quo alternative. So if you are someone with your hand up that would prefer status quo, I'm going to ask that you put your hand down at this time. What I'd like to do is get one or two comments regarding support for the substitute motion. And I'll start with Victor.
I would support anything that would have catch shares involved with flounder, scup, and sea bass. So that way it makes each sector responsible for their bycatch.
Thanks, Victor. Next, I have John DeParsonaire.
Yeah, John DeParsonaire from the Recreational Fishing Alliance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it was unfortunate that in this document and leading up to this point, there was no analysis done on the participants in these fisheries. I think if you look at the direct users of these resources, I think, you know, when you look at the net benefits to the nation, I think that argument clearly supports reallocation of these species. And it's hard to ignore the demographics. As Mike said before, this is not marlin. These are food fish. People go fishing for scup, black sea bass, and summer flounder to eat food, you know, and to catch their own stuff. And when we saw that fresh market and restaurants basically closed during COVID and the pandemic, guys were out fishing. We had 4 million new anglers. So they were out there providing their own seafood for themselves. And you cannot ignore that when we are still in the middle of this pandemic and you're talking about net benefits to the nation. In regards to the overages, I think it is appropriate to remove them as this substitute motion does. But I also think it's important to look at those overages and think about the word accountability. So we know we have good compliance in the recreational sector, and accountability for a recreational angler is following the regulations. That is accountability for us, and we are accountability. I know the commercial sector doesn't like the fact that we are open access. They like limited entry. But that is the nature of our fishery. And if you look at those overages, they clearly justify, again, they're not being used for this decision under this substitute motion, but they clearly demonstrate that there is a need to revisit this. So with all that said, I do support this substitute motion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, John. All right, that concludes our time allotted for public comment. Sorry for the folks who didn't have a chance to provide comment in person here today. I'd like to take a couple minutes to allow the states to caucus so that we can take up the motion. Let's say 2 minutes for a quick caucus with the states, and then we'll take up the question. Thank you. All right, do the states need any additional time to caucus on this? Okay, we'll go ahead and I'm going to read, I think the council's up first. So council's up first this time. So I'm going to read the motion into the record and then I'll call the question. So be ready to raise your hand. Move to substitute to adopt options Fluke 4, Scup 4, and Black Sea Bass 4 as preferred alternatives for the commercial recreational allocation amendment. For summer flounder, this results in a 50% allocation of the catch to the commercial sector and a 50% allocation of the catch to the recreational sector. For scup, this results in a 63.5% allocation of catch to the commercial sector and a 36.5% allocation of catch to the recreational sector. For black sea bass, this results in a 40.5% allocation of catch to the commercial sector and a 59.5% allocation of catch to the recreational sector. All those in favor, all those on the council in favor of this motion, please raise your hand. It's 13 in favor. We can clear the hands. Okay, all those opposed? It's 5 opposed. Clear the hands. Any abstentions? Okay, that's 1 abstention. Motion carries the council 13 to 5 to 1. I'm going to turn it over to Justin for the board.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the board, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Okay, Justin, I think the hands have settled. I have North Carolina, Potomac River Fisheries Commission, Delaware, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Virginia, New Jersey, Maryland, and New Hampshire. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Just waiting for the hands to clear. Okay, all those opposed, same sign.
I have New York and Rhode Island.
Okay, thank you. If we could clear the hands. Any null votes?
I see no hands.
Any abstentions?
2 abstentions, NOAA Fisheries, and Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, thank you. So the motion carries the board, 9 in favor, 2 opposed with 2 abstentions.
Okay, thank you. So the substitute motion now becomes the main motion. Who's controlling the motions right now? Is it Julia?
Julia's typing, but I think Stephen has control of the screen. So I think Stephen might need to scroll down a little bit. And if someone could remind me if I need to say anything differently than what I have on the screen. Do I need to repeat the whole motion?
Yeah, I'd like you to can you copy the motion that was just approved and throw that underneath the text that says substitute motion as main motion, and then just remove the first few words that say move to substitute? It would just be move to adopt. Okay, so we now have a main motion for consideration. Is there any discussion on the motion? Shanna? And then Jim, I'll come to you.
Yeah, as I was saying earlier, I think I was interested in moving to have a substitution on this motion. I don't know if this is an appropriate time, Mr. Chair, or if you need to speak with Jim first.
Well, I don't know what Jim's thoughts are. I know what yours are. Why don't you go ahead and make your motion, and then we'll talk to Jim. He might have something a little different, and we can continue this process until we exhaust it at this point. So
Okay.
Go ahead.
So my motion would be move to substitute the adoptions of allocations for all 3 species that are based on updating the base years with new data and applying those with landing space percentages for summer flounder and black sea bass to catch instead of landing. So that's essentially what the staff recommendations have been. Those would be alternatives 1A5, 1B2, and 1C5. For summer flounder, this results in a 55% share to the commercial sector and a 65% share to the recreational sector. For Scup, this results in a 65% share to the commercial sector and a 35% share to the recreational sector. And for black sea bass, this results in a 45% share to the commercial sector and a 55% share to the commercial sector, or recreational sector, excuse me.
Okay, thanks, Shanna. Let's We'll just take a moment here to make sure that that's reflected on the screen. I think Julia was typing all of that in, but I think we can use some of the language from previous motion, the main motion, to help fill that in. Stephen, if you can scroll the screen down, there we go. We'll get it squared away.
Somebody double check my math in there.
For Flounder, what I've written down was 55-45 for 55-45 for Scup. I wrote down 65-35. That's correct. And for black sea bass, I wrote down 45-55. Okay, so does that motion read as you intended it to, Shanna?
It does, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Shanna Matson makes that motion on behalf of the board. Let me ask if there is anyone else on the board that would like to second that motion. Jim Gilmore, your hand's still up. Is this along the lines that you were thinking, Jim? Just to get that out on the table now?
Yeah, it's the exact same motion I was going to offer, again, to mitigate some of the impact of the commercial industry. So I will second the motion for the board.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I appreciate that. Okay, so the motion has been made and seconded by members of the board. Let me turn to the council. Is there anyone that would like to make this motion on behalf of the council? Paul Reese, you're making this motion on behalf of the council?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. And Sonny Gwynn, on behalf of the council, second? Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So we have a motion to discuss. Shanna, you provided some rationale. Did you have anything else you wanted to add at this time?
Just that I think that, I've heard a lot of arguments from around the table, and for me, this felt like the best compromise of those arguments. It solves the problem of making sure that we are using the best available data. It makes sure to honor those base years that are so important to our fisheries. And I think that it does a good job of trying to provide that balance that we were looking for with some of the previous motions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Shanna. Jim, did you want to offer any rationale?
In the interest of time, Mr. Chairman, Janet said it very well, so I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Paul?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shanna said it very well.
And Sonny?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think this is a happy medium, although I'm not happy, but I'm hoping it makes the recreational sector happy. And I hope it makes the consumer happy. I'm hoping we can keep on feeding the consumer without, losing so much. And I appreciate the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Sonny. So if I could have Jim and Shanna and Sonny put their hands down, unless you have something you'd also like to offer. I'm going to go through a couple more names here, and then we will, hopefully you all had an opportunity to talk about something. We can caucus if you need to, but let's see where we are in a few minutes. Adam Nowalski, I'm sorry, Chris Bat-Savage first, and then Adam, you'll be after Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate the substitute motion to try to find another compromise based on the comments we've heard and concerns. I don't think I can support this, although it's updating the base years. The base years are pretty old, to say the least. And I know with other actions regarding reallocation, there was a lot of concerns about using those base years and not looking also at more recent years. It's more reflective of the stock and the fisheries. So I think for that reason, I'm going to have to oppose the substitute motion.
Adam Nowalski.
I'll offer the position of that what is really a compromise here, we shouldn't be looking at the last motion as ceiling, as there were significantly more options in the document that provided more reallocation to the recreation sector. When I looked at the comments that I received most recently, they were in support of the more extreme options, 5743 rec summer flounder, 39% on scup, 72% on black sea bass. That's what my constituents were looking for. So I think the middle ground of the what is now the main motion, that is representative of the middle ground, and appreciate the other comments that were made about using the new data. If we just use the new data with the old years, that's just like an update. That's really not doing and having the hard discussion about reallocation and what it is, and what are the issues surrounding current use and balancing that with historical use. So I will not be supporting this substitute and will be supporting the main motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Dan Farnham.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would be supporting this motion. I think it's a fair and equitable end to the whole saga. From my end, from my industry, got uncounted calls for status quo. All along, I felt that revised MRIT should be the way to go here. Commercial sector did gain some quota increases in 2 of these fisheries, revised MRIT. I want to point out too, with this motion, summer flounder in the recreational industry gets a 14% increase. The scup fishery, they get a 67% increase. That's a large increase here, that fishery. And then black sea bass, depending upon how the catch-based percentages are going to be applied, it's going to be between a 10 and 20% increase. That's pretty substantial also. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dan. Mike Petney.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate the makers of this motion. I think before we had on the table 2 options: a status quo, and then the motion that prevailed as a substitute motion to that. I had a lot of concerns with the status quo motion when it first went up, but it was overcome by events with the motion to substitute. I think this motion, addresses all the concerns that I had with the original motion for status quo by at least using the best available science information to update the original base years. The shift to catch-based, I think, is a good step forward. So, I appreciate the makers of this motion. I think this has a lot of advantages, for council and board consideration. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Eric Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. My original motion that failed miserably, the rationale that I used to make that motion still applies for me, so I can't support this motion or the underlying motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make clear that I feel whatever we do here today is not going to be right, but I do feel that status quo is more wrong. The MRIP it's a walk through Disney World, but when the fireworks show went off at Disney World and dumped a pile of fish on everybody, it was okay. So we would be remiss to not do something about that with MRIP in adjusting this here. And I think this is just a start, and I think we do need to revisit it
after we do something substantial about accounting what happens in the recreational sector. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. All right, I'm going to take one last comment. Tom Foti, and then we'll go ahead and vote this motion up or down. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, I always, they're saying no accountability. How do we get to 18 inches and 5 fish? We started out with 10 fish at 14 inches. And over the years in no season. And now we're down to a very restrictive season. And that's all because of accountability for going over. The other thing is, we never talked about the accountability of the illegal catches in summer flounder that was made by the commercial fishery. And I remember asking, when are we going to use those for accountability when there was 2 million pounds or 3 million pounds? I'm not going to go through all the court cases. And because it took 3 years, they said, we're not using them and we're not going to take any accountability for those illegal fish that were landed. And the same thing happened in New England when all those illegal fish were had by one person, venting the system. So there is accountability on the recreational sector. We have pushed the subsistence fishermen out of the scup fishery, the beach fishermen I'm talking about, the guys that fish with piers, on scup, summer flounder, and black sea bass. The only way they can take home fish to eat is actually poaching because they don't catch that size fish from the docks, the pier, or the beach most of the time, or 99% of the time. Thank you. I don't support this motion.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, let me ask, do the states need time to caucus, or have you been able to communicate your upcoming vote during the discussion?
It's caucus.
Okay, let's go ahead and caucus for 1 minute. Does anyone still need time? We're good? Okay, looks like the states are ready. I'm going to pass this over to Justin, who's going to call the question first of the board, and then we'll come to the council. Go ahead, Justin. If you could read it too, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Motion on the board is move to substitute the adoption of allocations for all 3 species that are based on updating the base years with new data, applying those as catch for all 3 species, alternatives 1A5, 1B2, and 1C5. For summer flounder, this results in a 55% commercial allocation and 45% recreational allocation. For scup, this results in a 65% commercial allocation and 35% recreational allocation. For black sea bass, this results in a 45% commercial allocation and 55% recreational allocation. This time, all those on the board in favor, please raise your hand.
I have Delaware, New York, Virginia, Rhode Island, PRFC, and New Hampshire.
Okay, thank you. If we could clear the hands. Okay, all those opposed, same sign.
I have North Carolina, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and Connecticut.
Okay, just waiting for the hands to clear. Any null votes?
1 null vote, Maryland.
Any abstentions?
2 abstentions, NOAA Fisheries and Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, motion carries the board, 6 in favor, 4 opposed, 1 null vote, 2 abstentions.
Okay, thanks, Justin. Now to the council. All those members of the council that support the motion, please raise your hand. Okay, that's 13 in favor. Clear the hands, please. All those opposed? Same sign. Six in opposition. Clear the hands, please. Any abstentions? We have 1 abstention from the National Marine Fisheries Service. Motion carries. Council 13 to 6 to 1. Therefore, this substitute motion now becomes the main motion.
Stephen, can you scroll down again?
Okay, so that substitute motion that was just voted up is now the main motion. Is there any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and call the question of the council. So all those in favor of the main motion, now please raise your hand. Okay, that's 14 in favor. On behalf of the council. Clear the hands, please. All those opposed, same sign. That's 5 opposed. Any abstentions? 1 abstention by the National Marine Fisheries Service. Now to the board. Justin?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the board, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
Okay, just waiting for settle. I have Massachusetts, Delaware, Virginia, New York, New Hampshire, Potomac River Fisheries Commission, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and Mike Luisi, was your hand up and I lost it, or was it not meant to be up?
It was up and then I took it down.
Okay,
We
so
didn't lose anything, it just went down. So yeah, Maryland is going to null vote here.
okay, okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure I didn't
Yep.
miss it. Then that is, I think that's all the hands. Yes, all the hands.
Okay, thanks. Just waiting for the hands to clear. All those opposed, same sign.
North Carolina.
Okay, any null votes in addition to Maryland?
I don't see any additions.
Any abstentions?
I have NOAA and Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, the motion carries the board, 9 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 null vote, 2 abstentions.
Okay, thanks, Justin. All right, so we've taken on the one portion of this amendment. We have 2 additional motions that will be needed in moving forward. I'm just checking here. So we need to take action on transfers, and we need to take action on frameworkable items. Kylie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know there are two pieces left that we need to take action on, correct?
Yeah, actually, phase-ins is something that needs to be addressed first, and then transfers, and then framework addendum provisions, and then we'll need a motion from the board to approve the amendment and a motion from the council to submit the amendment.
Okay, sorry, I forgot the phase in. So as you can see up on the screen, this was the original staff recommendation. So the last 3 bullets there include the staff recommendation on phase in, transfers, and framework actions. So I'll look around the room and on my computer screen to see if anyone would like to make a motion on behalf of the council or the board. Chris Bat-Savage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to approve alternative 1D-1, no phase in for reallocation. I'll do that on behalf of the council and the board.
Chris, do you want to take this one at a time? Is that your intent, or do you want to go through? I mean, it's up to you. If you had other thoughts on transfers and frameworkable items, we could do it all together if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, so, well, not all 3, but 1D-1 and also support alternative 2A, no action on transfers.
Sorry, I'm just waiting for this to come up here. I can't see the whole screen. Stephen, there you go. Can I ask you to maybe add alternative 3B there, or did you not? Did you want to hold off on the frameworkable items? It's up to you, Chris. If you want to just wait, we can take these 2 and then we can handle the next one by itself.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. There might be a little more discussion on whether it should be frameworkable. So I know we try to get this done as quick as possible, but let's see if we can at least maybe get some sort of resolution on these 2. And thanks.
It's totally fine. Yeah, we need to do this one. That's fine. So Chris made a motion on behalf of both the board and the council. Can I ask for a second on behalf of the council? Maureen Davidson is going to second that on behalf of the council.
Yes.
Okay. And for the board, Jenna Madsen seconds that on behalf of the board. Is there any discussion of the motion? Chris, did you want to provide any rationale?
Yeah, quickly. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think based on the reallocations we just took action on, they're small enough to where a phase in I don't think is necessary. It just adds complication. And again, I think with just both sectors utilizing their quotas pretty much to the fullest, probably no ability to do any transfers in the foreseeable future.
All right, thanks, Chris. In the interest of time, I'm just going to, instead of going through everyone, I'm just going to look around the table to see if there are any other comments. Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really quickly, so I support this motion, but I also really think that, as another tool down the road, the council needs to consider carryover provisions. We are allowed to carry over unused components of ACLs from one year to the next. Unfortunately, the National Standard 1 guidance that came out last year isn't quite as helpful as we would like. I will note that it does allow for, in the absence of a carryover provision within an ABC control rule, ABC adjustments can be considered on a case-by-case basis. And just given how fully utilized, these ACLs are for both sectors and how unpalatable this entire conversation is with respect to allocation, I think it is much more acceptable to each sector to be able to carry over unused allocation that they might have. I recognize that it is rare in some instances, but I would just put that out there for us to think about in the future. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Michelle. You're not suggesting that be something we could consider here today.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Oh, no.
Okay. I just wanted to check. Getting a little lightheaded up here right now. Okay, so thanks, Michelle. Maureen Davidson, your hand's still up. Did you want to provide rationale or have any discussion on this motion?
No, I'll lower my hand.
Okay, thanks, Maureen. Anyone else? Nicola Meserve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Given the very incremental step that we've taken for reallocation, I don't think the phase-in is necessary. It does give me some pause about not allowing transfers to be considered in the Scup fishery, for example. So while I'm going to support this motion as it is, when you're ready for it, I'll make a motion for alternative 3B so that transfers could be considered as a frameworkable item. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. Anyone else have any comment on the motion? Okay, seeing none, do the states need time to caucus on this? Okay, not seeing anyone here saying they need time to caucus. I think council's up first on this one. I'm going to read the motion into the record and call the question. I move to approve the following alternatives for the commercial recreational allocation amendment. No phase-in for reallocation alternative 1D-1. No action on transfers alternative 2A. On behalf of the council, is there any opposition to the motion? Any opposition? Michelle?
Damn. Hand thing.
It's okay.
Hand is down.
Okay, seeing no opposition to this motion, the motion carries the council with no objection. I'm going to pass it over to Justin for the board. Justin?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll ask the board if there are any objections to the motion. Not seeing any, I'll ask if there are any abstentions.
One abstention, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Thank you, Tony. So the motion carries the board by consent with one abstention from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Motion carries both the council and the board, so therefore we can move on to the alternative set 3. Nicola, you had a motion for that?
Yes, thank you. I would move to allow future changes to commercial recreational allocations, transfers, and other measures included in this amendment to be made through a framework/addendum, which is alternative 3B.
Can I get a second for the board? Jim Gilmore? And on behalf of the council, can I get someone to consider that as a maker of the motion on behalf of the council? Michelle Duvall, is your hand really going up this time?
It really is going up this
Okay,
time.
excellent. And I have Paul Risi as a second. Nicola, I'll allow you to give a second to speak on this.
Thank you. I think staff laid out the rationale for their recommendation pretty well. This is, putting it in the toolbox. It does not require the board and council to use a framework or addendum for these issues, but would allow them to in the future. I wouldn't see that major allocation decisions would be considered through a framework, but I think specifically with regards to transfers or maybe small data updates, it would be, an more efficient way to allow those updates to occur in the future. Thanks.
Thanks, Nicola. Any other comment on the motion? Justin, would you like to call the question? Are we up again this time? That's fine. I'll read it into the record and we'll call the question. Move to allow future changes to the commercial recreational allocations, transfers, and other measures included in this amendment to be made through a framework/addendum, which is alternative 3B. On behalf of the council, is there anyone that objects to this motion? Joe Semino, you do object? And Dan Farnham. Okay. So okay, given that there's some objection to this, let's go ahead and I'll call the question for a vote. So on behalf of the council, all those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Counted 15 in support. Clear the hands, please. All those opposed? That's 5 in opposition. No abstentions. Or I'll ask, are there any abstentions? There shouldn't be any. No. Okay, motion carries the council 15-5-0. Justin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the board, is there any objection to this motion? Okay, seeing some objection, we'll go ahead and call a vote. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
Okay, I have Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina. And if you could not take your hands down, or that would be great because it shifts everything. Rhode Island, Virginia, NOAA Fisheries, Delaware, Potomac River Fisheries Commission, New Hampshire, Maryland, and U.S. Fish Wildlife Service. That's it.
Okay, thanks. Just waiting for the hands to clear. All those opposed, same sign.
I have New Jersey.
Okay, thank you. Any null votes?
I see no null votes.
Any abstentions?
I see no abstentions.
Okay, the motion carries the board 11 in favor, 1 opposed, no null votes, no abstentions.
Okay, the motion carries. We're going to move on to concluding our business by asking for a board-only and a council-only motion to move these documents forward. So on the screen, we have the board first. So Justin, I'll turn it over to you to ask for a motion on behalf of the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll look to the board if somebody is willing to make the motion that we have up here on the board. I see Jim Gilmore. For a second, I see John Clark. Okay, any discussion on the motion? Jim, did you want to offer something or is your hand still up from before? Okay, seeing no interest in discussing, I'll call the question. I'll read the motion into the record. Move to recommend to the commission to approve the summer flounder, scup, and black sea bass commercial recreational allocation amendment as modified today with an implementation date of January 1st, 2023. I'll ask the board if there are any objections to the motion. Seeing no objections, I'll ask if there are any abstentions. I note 2 abstentions from NOAA National Marine Fisheries Service and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The motion carries the board by consent.
Okay, thank you, Justin. If we can scroll down the screen to the next motion for the council. Would anyone like to make that motion on behalf of the council? Paul Reese, if you could you read it into the record for me?
I move to submit this amendment with identification of the preferred alternatives to NOAA Fisheries.
Thank you, Paul. Seconded by Kate Wilkie. Is there any discussion of the motion? Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, the motion carries with no objection. Let me ask, are there any abstentions? 1 abstention from the National Marine Fisheries Service. Is there anything else that we need to take up under this action here today, Kylie? So, Savannah?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. I want to thank everybody for a long day. It was a long one. This adjourns our joint meeting with Summer Flounder, Scup, and Black Sea Bass Board. Thank you to my co-chair, Mr. Justin Davis, for helping me navigate through this here today. Hope everyone is safe getting home, and I hope you enjoy your holidays and look forward to seeing you soon. The council will be on recess until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. And Chris has
I have the same
something to say.
Yeah, I do have something to say. Same announcements as I made yesterday. We have our council photo tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So don't forget that. Try to show up early so that Mary can arrange you appropriately photo. And we do have hospitality again this evening in the same room, 6:32. See you all there. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Chris. Enjoy your evening. See you guys in the morning. Thank you all for your time today.